This is the best new features of Apple's new MacBooks. We've got Apple Silicon MacBooks coming for the first time, 3 MacBooks possibly to be released, a 16-inch and 2 smaller MacBooks coming to 13-inch models according to all the information we know. So here it is, all the information and the best new features of the new MacBooks at the Apple November 2020 launch event. And before we get into the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, check out the links in the description for today's deals and discounts coming up to Black Friday as well. The Amazon links will be there for you to go and check out. So according to Mark Gurman and Bloomberg, we will be seeing a new 16-inch MacBook Pro coming this year. It may actually launch slightly later than the other 2 MacBooks, which are certainly going to be the first to carry Apple Silicon. These are the new chips from Apple, more efficient. But the MacBook Pro 16-inch maybe not released at the launch event, or at least not on sale, because apparently the development of this MacBook is slightly behind the other 2 smaller MacBooks. Anyway, the last time we had a brand new 16-inch MacBook Pro was 2019. There were a couple of upgrades and options added, I think, in summer 2020, but this is going to be the first new one since then. So actually, this MacBook may actually not be carrying Apple Silicon. That may be reserved for the smaller 2 MacBooks. The reason that the larger 16-inch MacBook Pro maybe isn't using Apple Silicon, but rather carrying on with Intel processors, is just because of how powerful it has to be. And the Apple Silicon chips are, for the moment anyway, obviously based more on the smartphone chip designs, slightly smaller, slightly less powerful than those really top high-end MacBook Pro chipsets that you get from Intel right now. Mark Gurman from Bloomberg tells us that the 16-inch MacBook is coming, and it will actually come slightly later than the other 2, as I said. Apple are working on their own desktop class, so this is high power and high power draw SoCs with their own CPUs and GPUs. These are in development, but they are certainly not going to be ready for this 16-inch MacBook Pro. The first computer that chipset will be in, according to industry sources, is a new iMac. So obviously it's a lot bigger and is always connected to a mains power outlet, and so power draw and battery life isn't an issue. This is the first time that we'll see a desktop class SoC from Apple with their own CPUs and GPUs. And then obviously by the time the end of 2021 comes about, that SoC should be ready to put in the very top end MacBook Pros. So 2021 for the top end MacBook Pros to have Apple Silicon, according to what we know right now. Of course, we have 2 other MacBooks that are definitely coming at this event. And for me, these are going to be the stars of the show at the Apple event, because these are the Apple Silicon Macs. And so obviously Apple are going to make a big deal out of these. We firstly have a 13-inch MacBook. This may be called the Pro. It may not be, not sure on naming now, but it's going to be a 13-inch MacBook running on Apple Silicon. This actually could be the MacBook for most people, and it's actually crazy if you think about it how powerful this could be for the price and size. The reason we know how good it could be is because a lot of synthetic benchmarks that we've already seen and just real world results of A14 processors in iPads that are actually faster than some other MacBooks. We've seen time and time again real world tests, for example, exporting videos in iMovie or Final Cut Pro, which is actually quicker on iPad than it is on those cheaper MacBooks. Even though those cheaper MacBooks have way higher energy draw and fans, it's still quicker on the iPads. We've also seen that actually the current iPad 11-inch is more powerful in benchmarks than the current MacBook Pro 13-inch. And so with the new MacBook Pro running on Apple Silicon, obviously we can see this to be a super powerful product for the price. It's also been reported by Bloomberg that internally Apple have seen very good battery results for these new MacBooks running Apple Silicon. Obviously they are going to say this, but we could see improvements of up to 3 times in the 13-inch MacBook Pro versus the current models, simply because Apple will be using these much lower power draw chipsets. The current iPad, for example, has no fans in there. It's cheaper, thinner, lighter, and has better battery life than the MacBook Pro. So obviously reading across to a MacBook Pro using a similar sort of processor, we should see some very good upgrades when it comes to power and efficiency. It's not all rosy though, because a lot of this is actually run on apps that are native to the ARM architecture on the CPUs. And so We're going to have to wait for all third-party developers to actually develop apps to run on Apple Silicon. Right now, those apps don't and aren't as efficient as the apps that have already been made to run on Apple Silicon. What this means is that if you're buying a new MacBook Pro 13-inch now, you may not notice those super fast results like you're getting in iPads, at least right away. So we might have to wait a little while until the whole ecosystem moves over to the Apple Silicon architecture. Obviously, what's exciting in the future is how iOS, iPadOS, and macOS are all going to be running on the same hardware, which means there is going to be a seamless experience between all of these. This is years away though. Apple have said themselves they're at least 2 years away from actually moving everything over to Apple Silicon. So this isn't going to be like a huge revolutionary product. I don't think right away. It will be in the future, but this is literally the first one. As for the design, all of the information we have, which isn't a lot to be honest, tells us that the design probably won't change at all. Information from Bloomberg telling us that, yeah, they may just use the current iPhone design, so the MacBook design for the MacBook Pro and possibly the MacBook Air design. That's for the slightly smaller model. We don't yet know if this will be called the MacBook Air or just be called the MacBook 12-inch. So moving on to that MacBook 12-inch, and we know from Bloomberg again that this is coming, whether it be called the MacBook Air or just the MacBook with the smaller screen. This should be one of the slimmest laptops on the market. The current MacBook 12-inch is very tiny, very slim, great looking. But the problem with that is that it just wasn't very powerful. And to be honest, is beaten by iPads in terms of portability and power and battery life as well. We do have some specs for this anyway leaked. So this will have the Apple Silicon chipset inside, possibly the A14X chipset, same as the upcoming iPad Pro. A 12-inch Retina display, 8GB of RAM, possibly around 10-15 hours of battery life, and one single USB port. USB-C obviously, and a butterfly keyboard on that. So that's the controversial keyboard that Apple used, which most people didn't like in the MacBook Pro, and they had to switch it out for the newer one. So kind of controversial in that respect, but they are obviously trying to just get the thinnest laptop they can. My personal thoughts on that MacBook specifically is that I really don't see the use case for it. Having a ultra thin laptop with kind of the same performance as an iPad. I mean, the iPad just seems like a better bet for most people. You can get the Magic Keyboard, which doesn't have a butterfly keyboard. It's one of these scissor switches, so most people prefer that. You also just get a much more portable device. It's more modern looking. You can obviously take the Magic Keyboard off and use it with your finger or Apple Pencil. I just think the iPad or iPad Pro and then the upcoming iPad just has a better use case for most people. But hey, this is what Apple are doing. And according to all the leaks, a 12-inch MacBook with Apple Silicon is coming. So a 12-inch and a 13-inch MacBook, and also that 16-inch possibly going on sale at a later date, although we may see it at the launch event. October 10th, 10 a.m. Pacific time in the US for that launch event. Let me know all your thoughts about the upcoming MacBooks and Apple Silicon in the comments. It's super exciting, but early stages. That's it for this one though. Thank you for watching. Thumbs up if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.